Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And this is going to potentially be a very special episode of our long-running series involving the Buffalo Wings. Because the 2044 playoffs are about to begin tomorrow. We, by virtue of our 104-58 record, the best record in baseball, are back in the playoffs for a record 17th consecutive season. So we won't be playing our first game for several more days until the wild card series have been settled. But in addition to that 17th consecutive playoff appearance, it is conceivable as we begin this episode that this is our final episode with Dashawn Seifu as a member of the Buffalo Wings. Seifu, as those of you who have been watching the series probably know, is a guy we drafted number 1 overall in 2026. The only time in this playthrough is an expansion team where we had the number 1 pick in the draft. And Seifu has had an exceptional career in Buffalo. He's spent part of each of the past 19 seasons in the majors with Buffalo. He's been our regular second baseman and third baseman for most of that time. Won a couple gold gloves at second base back in the day. He's been a DH for the last season and a half. And this year, with his declining ability, he eventually turned into a part-time player for us, playing only against left-handed pitching. You can see he hit just 243 this year with a 75 WRC plus. But he was still useful against left-handed pitching, hitting 303 with a 117 WRC plus against lefties. But at this point in his career, he's 40 years old. He is useless in the field, but he is still an extremely durable player, still has exceptional speed for a 40-year-old, still a great influence in the clubhouse. And as we talked about, he was still effective against left-handed pitching. But we hold a $6 million team option for him for next year that we will certainly be declining once our season is over. And coming off of what is, by any measure, the worst season of Seifu's career since he broke into the starting lineup for good in 2027. I think it's conceivable that he retires at the end of this year. And with this being our playoff episode, it could be the last episode of Dashawn Seifu, who has been a really fun story to watch. Almost 3,200 hits, almost 700 doubles, almost 200 triples, and more stolen bases than anyone in baseball history except Rickey Henderson, also having led the National League in steals for a ridiculous 15 consecutive years. It's been quite a ride with Seifu, and just want to take a moment here to acknowledge it and appreciate it, because the ride could be coming to an end. A lot of you have opined on what we should do with him at the end of this season if he does decide to come back. I don't see myself letting him move to some other team and play in the minors as a 41-year-old. There has been a suggestion to do what I am normally extremely reticent to do and use my commissioner powers to just retire him, so he doesn't end up doing that or doesn't end up playing somewhere else. Still not 100% sure what the future will hold for him and the Buffalo Wings, but he could very well take the potential for us to make a decision out of our hands if he does decide to retire at the end of the playoffs. As we get ready for the playoffs, also got a fair amount of thoughts on what we should do as far as our starting lineups, more specifically who should be on our team. And as we think about the playoff roster, have made what's probably a controversial decision, but we are going to have the young shortstop, Josh Fuchs, who is only 22 years old and who proved with a miserable 28 WRC plus that he is not ready for Major League pitching when we called him up for his glove on September 1st. But we are going to have Mr. Fuchs on the playoff roster. He is by far the best defensive shortstop in our organization. And although since we only picked him up this past off season and we've been trying to maximize his skill at shortstop, it's really the only position he can play for us. Still feel like there could be a situation in the 8th or 9th inning of a playoff game where Fuchs makes a play that gets us a win that Mike Whitehead or Danny Ferguson would not have made. And because of that, we're going to keep him on the team, even though in a perfect world he's only playing shortstop for an inning or two in the 8th and 9th inning of games where we've got a lead. Putting Fuchs on the team meant that the somewhat controversial Alejandro Contreras is not on the roster. He's almost 29 years old at this point, while his ratings, especially as a major leaguer, are better than Fuchs at this point. Contreras still hit just a $167 for us in 108 bats in the majors this year. And his glove is not as good as Fuchs. So although Contreras has the ability to play multiple positions, we're really going to be very specialized with Mr. Fuchs. And he is our defensive swap at shortstop in games where we have a lead. And hopefully the AI will be able to figure that out for us. Dodo Dude brought up after the strong debut of our excellent young right fielder, Jim Reichert, potentially trying to lock him up for the long term. I had looked at this before we even brought him up and hadn't pulled the trigger on making him an offer. But now that we do have at least 26 games of him at the majors and he's producing pretty prodigiously with a 132 WRC plus over that time span, we have made an offer to him which will buy out all 3 of his seasons making the major league minimum, plus 3 arbitration years, plus several free agent years. We're going to be overpaying pretty significantly these next few years if he accepts the offer. But we're giving him long-term financial security in exchange for some of those free agent years where the number would be much lower than likely if he does continue to develop and produce as we think he could. So he was willing to consider an offer 11 years for $119 million. It's really a 10-year deal. The 11th year of that contract is a player option at a number that if Reichert produces the way that we think he can, he will almost certainly opt out of. But if we can get him locked up at an average of around $11 million a year for the next decade, even though we're paying more than we would for the next 4 or 5 years, we're probably getting a bargain for the final arbitration year or 2, plus his free agent years. So that was something that I'm glad that we have got out there. And the last thing before we kind of start moving forward was brought up in the comments to the previous episode, just the incredible year that Irving Barunda of the Expos had with his 9.2 WAR. He's 30 years old, likely to become a 3-time MVP after this season. And it was, as you can see here, an absolutely incredible season for the center fielder. Led the National League in average, on-base percentage, slugging, OPS, WRC plus, and WAR, while hitting 39 home runs, 52 doubles, more than 100 runs, and more than 100 ribbies. So a incredible season from Barunda. And he is a guy that conceivably we could be facing in the playoffs in the NLCS if we keep winning and the Expos keep winning. In addition to the potential last go-round for Seifu, Alexis Barajas, who has been a part of all three of our World Championship teams, along with Seifu, can opt out of his contract at the end of this season. And our big first baseman, Daniel Rojas, the 38-year-old who had the best of his 4 seasons since we picked him up as a free agent in Buffalo, is also headed to free agency potentially at the end of this year. So could be the last go-round for several of these players. Would love to get a 4th World Championship for the franchise and a 4th World Championship for Dashawn Seifu before he potentially has to make some difficult decisions this offseason. And he potentially could put us in a situation where we'll have some difficult decisions to make this offseason as well. And as we prepare for a playoff series, which looks like it will be against the Padres, Reichert has signed the contract. Can show you the details of that now. As I mentioned, we'll be paying him $2, $4, and $6 million the next 3 years, as opposed to the major league minimum, then 8, 9, 10, possibly $12 million through his arbitration years. So probably a little high in the first year. By the end of that, if he doesn't get hurt and if he remains healthy and producing the way that we think and expect he will, given his profile, we'll start getting a bargain towards those later arbitration years and the first couple free agent years. And as I noted, the final year is one that if he produces the way that we think he will likely opt out of. And as we get ready to face the Padres, take a look at what happened in the wild card series. In the National League, the Padres swept the Mets, and the Nationals swept the Expos, so we won't be facing Irving Barunda, even if we do get by the Padres. The Twins swept the Blue Jays, and Detroit took 2 out of 3 against the White Sox to move on to face the AL West winning Royals. So take a look at this series here, and although we were 16 games better than the Padres, who were 88 and 74, looks like it could be an interesting matchup. They did take the season series against us. Granted, it was only 1 series, but they did take 2 out of 3. And although we are 3rd in the National League in runs scored and 1st in runs against, they're an above-average team in both categories as well, 5th in runs scored and 6th in runs against. So certainly would favor us on paper, and certainly hope and expect that we will get to the NLDS. But I don't think it's going to be a total walkover. We do have Jim Lance, the 2nd-round pick from 2036, who became our number 1 starter this year, went 13-7 with a 2.81 ERA, and led the National League in WHIP for a 2nd consecutive year while posting a career-high 5 WAR on the mound for us. He'll be going up against Jeff Simons, left-handed pitcher, 27-year-old, who was 11-7 with a 3.22 ERA for San Diego. Last year, he led the league in walks, strikeouts, and strikeouts per 9 innings. You can see his stuff is absolutely incredible, but his control is absolutely brutal. And being that he's a left-handed hitter, does mean that Dashawn Seifu will be in the lineup for us here in Buffalo for perhaps his final playoff series with the Buffalo Wings and in his career. And we'll see if we can get things off to a good start. And we do get a 4-2 win. Our stopper, Floyd Auclair, with the W. Our closer, Joe Scott, came on and got the save. Would love to see Mr. Fuchs' name in the box score, and would actually love to see that he made a play or two. Taking a look at the box score, we jumped out early with runs in both the first and the second inning, but they came back and tied it in the fifth. We took a lead with a run in the seventh, solo home run by Josh Porter, and then also added an insurance run in the eighth. Seifu 0 for 2 did score a run. Looks like Fuchs did come on and play shortstop. But after that, it looks like there may have been a double switch involving Tim Boston. So I don't know how I feel about Tim Boston ending up playing at third base for us and Medina pivoting over to second base. So interesting situation there because Fuchs got an at-bat as well. I would assume if we would decide to keep Fuchs in the game and let him have an at-bat while he's a defensive substitute, the fact that we brought in an outfielder to subsequently substitute for him in the ninth inning is a curious decision by our AI manager, and certainly not the way I would have written it up. All right, well, that explains it a little better. Josh Fuchs was injured in a collision at a base, so our AI manager is not completely crazy. We'll have to see what Fuchs looks like as far as his injury. Pending diagnosis here, so his trip to the playoffs could be relatively brief. Simons kind of played to type today with 5 walks and 6 strikeouts over 3 1/3 innings. Verzani took the loss in relief. Lance 4 hits and a walk while striking out 4 over 4 2/3. But Hale, Auclair, and Scott combined for 4 1/3 innings of 2-hit scoreless relief. So we got the W. We'll find out what goes on with Mr. Fuchs, and I'm glad to know that our manager is not completely insane. And unfortunately, as you can see here, Fuchs strained back muscle, going to be out for 2 to 3 weeks, so that will likely end his postseason, regardless of how long our Buffalo Wings are alive in the playoffs. And with the injury to Fuchs, we placed him on the playoff IL, so we have put Mr. Contreras back onto the roster for the remainder of this postseason series. As I mentioned, gives us more positional flexibility, but he is not as high-end a potential defensive player for us as Mr. Fuchs is. So moving on now to game number 2 of the series, Tony Coram on the mound for the San Diego Padres. The 25-year-old was 10-3 this year with a 3.16 ERA. Pretty solid pitcher. Looks like he came over to San Diego in a trade with the Dodgers a little less than a year ago. So a nice performance by him. But as nice a pitcher as Tony Coram is, we will have Alexis Barajas on the mound. Led the National League this year with 18 wins, 18-2 record, 2.46 ERA, and a 4.3 WAR. Would expect him to get some significant support for the National League Cy Young Award based on the numbers he put up this year. And as I noted, he has the opportunity to opt out of his contract at the end of this year. So like Mr. Seifu and Rojas, Barajas could be in his final games as a member of the Buffalo Wings in the coming days. With Barajas in particular, this could be his final game with us if we end up losing this series. But hopefully that won't be the case, and hopefully he'll help us head out to beautiful San Diego with a 2-0 lead. And he does help us do that, a 4-3 win. Once again, the decision at least as far as the win, went into the bullpen with Simeon Minnelli earning the W, Scott picking up a second straight save. San Diego jumped on us early with 3 runs in the second, but we came back with a run in the third and then 3 in the fourth. Run scoring double from the third baseman Medina, and then Luis Comaduran with a run scoring single for us to propel us to the victory. A couple of hits from Boston, a couple of hits from Ferguson offensively. Barajas, not a vintage Barajas outing. 3 1/3 innings pitched, 5 hits, 2 walks, and 3 earned runs. But after that, our excellent bullpen once again took care of business, allowing just 2 hits over the last 5 2/3 innings and no runs, as we will be heading to San Diego up 2-0. And Wilson Castro will be on the mound here in San Diego for Game 3 of the series. The 29-year-old was 9-4 with a 3.37 ERA this year for the Padres. And he'll be going against Eric Barbarito, who, although he is not as old nor as accomplished as the likes of Rojas, Barajas, and Seifu, could also be playing his final games in a Buffalo uniform. Our first-round draft pick from 11 years ago came up through our farm system, has been in the majors for over 6 years at this point, and he is potentially headed to free agency this offseason. I've gotten some good thoughts on him in the comments to previous episodes with the depth of pitching that we do have in our farm system, and the fact that right now Barbarito is looking for 8 years and over $17 million a year. I think I am inclined to likely move on from him. 9-9 this year with a 4.24 ERA. Did put up a 4.1 WAR, had a 2.94 Sierra. So he probably didn't pitch quite as mediocrely, if that's a word, as his numbers indicate. But certainly a less favorable pitching matchup for us than the first two when we had Lance and Barajas on the mound. But we'll try to get this series wrapped up today because we can see that the Giants are also up 2-0 on the Nationals. So would like to put ourselves in a similar situation as well as our compared to our potential opponent in terms of rest before the potential NLCS. And the easiest way to ensure that we get as much, if not more, rest than our opponent is to win here today. And we do get the W. Once again, we go to the bullpen to find the winner, Luis Palencia. Joe Scott picks up a third save in 3 games. Ramiro Medina, the young third baseman, wins the NLDS MVP. Taking a look at the box score, we scored runs in the 5th and 6th. They came back in the 6th and 7th to tie things up. But then we burst for 4 runs in the top of the 8th. Run scoring single by Ishmael Velasco. And the backup catcher Malone with a 3-run homer. Wonder what the decision-making was there. Looks like he was just used as a pinch hitter. Wow, that's a bold move. I don't normally think of Malone as being the best bat off of our bench, but credit to our manager, Nomar Rehifo, for making a really good decision there. Pinch hitting Malone comes through with the big blow. You can see the series MVP Medina, 2 for 4 today with 2 runs scored. Barbarito, I guess sadly for us, but positively gave us the best starting appearance out of any of our pitchers in this series. 5 2/3 innings, 4 hits, no walks, and 11 strikeouts for Eric Barbarito. Ruckel, Auclair, Palencia, Hale, and Scott combined for the last 3 1/3 innings. The bullpen finally did give up a run. The stopper, Eau Claire, blew the save and gave it up. But thanks to the 3-run home run from Mr. Malone, our Buffalo Wings are 3-0 winners in the NLDS, and we are off to the NLCS. And the NLCS has become a familiar place to see our Buffalo Wings. We've been in the NLCS now 3 consecutive years, but we only made it to the World Series 3 years ago when we ended up winning. Each of the last 2 seasons, we've fallen in the NLCS. And we've talked about this previously. Over the course of this playthrough, the NLCS has been a pretty tricky spot for us. We have a 3-6 record in the National League Championship Series. So we've gotten there 9 times and only been successful 1/3 of the time. The only positive thing is that when we have gotten through the NLCS to the World Series, we have won it all every year. So we would love to see that same script again here in 2044. And on paper, it may have ended up being the best case scenario for us as far as our National League Championship Series foe, because the Nationals came back to take the final 3 games of the series, overcome that 2-0 deficit, and upend the Giants. So we'll be hosting our division rivals in Game 1 of the NLCS today. Over in the American League, all chalk. The Guardians took out the Twins 3-0. The Royals, with a more difficult series, but still took the Tigers out in 5. So the division-leading Guardians and Royals will be facing off in the ALCS, while the NL East division rivals will be facing off in our NLCS. And with the time off we had, we'll be in a good situation with Lance and Barajas going in games 1 and 2. Looks like we'll be facing our old buddy Juan Estrada, the lefty, in game number 2. So that means we'll see Seifu against his old friend. But we've got to get by Brad White first before we get to that game number 2. And Brad White's also a lefty, so we'll be seeing some Seifu the next couple of days in Buffalo. Brad White, a 24-year-old, was the 11th pick in the draft just 2 years ago. 7-11 with a 3.65 ERA for the Nationals this year. Pretty impressive looking young pitcher. Does have some personality quirks. It says he's nothing if not fickle and is unmotivated, but he knows how to throw a baseball, and we'll see how he performs today against our ace, Jim Lance. And good performance from Lance today, presumably, as he got the W in a 9-1 victory and 4 home runs. Porter, the NLDS MVP Medina, last year's first-round draft pick, Danny Ferguson. Actually, it might have been 2 years ago that he was our first-round draft pick. And the top prospect from this year, Jim Reichert, all hit home runs for us. Taking a look at the box score, we jumped on them early with 2 runs in both the first and the second innings, and never really looked back. Seifu, 1 for 3 with 2 runs scored. Everyone except for Rojas and Ramirez in the starting lineup had hits for us. Lance, 2 hits, 1 walk, and 9 strikeouts over 5 1/3. And then Simeon Manelli and Kevin Hale, kind of middle or long relievers used. So we've got the top guys in the bullpen should be completely rested as we try to hopefully in game number 2 score some runs off of our old friend Juan Estrada. The international amateur free agents also revealed. I'll take a look at them offline eventually. Interesting that there's another guy named Juan Estrada who also happens to be a starting pitcher who's in the pool. I don't know that he is actually a potential two-way player like the Juan Estrada, it does not appear that he would be a very good two-way player. Moving back to the playoffs, we've got Barajas on the mound. I mentioned Juan Estrada, who was a excellent two-way player for us as a left-handed pitcher and a left-handed hitting outfielder who played every day against right-handed batting for us for many seasons. Taking a look back at his career in Buffalo, 293 hitter with a 389 on-base percentage over nearly 3,000 at-bats during his career. He put up a 15.4 WAR for us while he was with us as a batter. And as a pitcher, he was a very important member of our rotation for both of our first two championship clubs. Overall, he was 101-58 with a 3.57 ERA and 24 WAR for us as a pitcher. Led the National League in ERA back in 2035. And you can see he was a Divisional Series MVP for us 3 times during his career. So nice to see Mr. Estrada, but the hope is that we score some runs against him today. Hadn't mentioned this before, but you can see we were 10-3 against Washington this year, and we were 18 games ahead of them in the standings. So hopefully we can keep the momentum going here today. Not to be the case, though. A 2-0 loss for us as Estrada outduels his old rotation mate Alexis Barajas. They got 2 runs on us in the 4th, a 2-run home run from Soto off of Barajas, and that was kind of it. Not a ton of offense from us. We did get a hit from Seifu, Rojas, Reichert, and a couple of hits from Velasco, but all singles, and just 5 for 32 on the day. Barajas was fine. 5 hits, no walks, 8 strikeouts, 2 earned runs over 6 innings. But Estrada with 4 hits, a walk, and 9 strikeouts over 6 2/3, and then scoreless relief from Griggs and Teckenbrock. We will be heading to Washington, knotted up at 1-1, and they've taken the home field advantage away from us. So we've landed in Buffalo, or we've landed in Washington. We've left Buffalo and headed to Washington, knotted up 1-1. Not exactly where we wanted to be. We've got Eric Barbarito, who, as we talked about after Game 3 of the NLDS, gave us our best pitching performance in that series. He'll be going up against Joe Axel. 32-year-old was 12-8 with a 5.10 ERA for the Nationals this year. He was last year's NL Cy Young Award winner when he had 17 wins and a 2.38 ERA, both of which were the best in the National League, but kind of regressed a bit this year. So hopefully his relatively poor performances this season will continue here in the NLCS, although you can see he's got a 0.69 ERA in his first couple of games in the playoffs this year, so he seems to have rounded into form. Hopefully we'll end that today. And we do get a 4-1 victory. Barbarito gets the win, Axel with the loss, Joe Scott with the save. Home runs from the young left fielder Tim Boston and the young second baseman Danny Ferguson. We scored a run in the 2nd on a solo home run by Ferguson. They came back and tied it in the bottom of the inning. But in the top of the 6th, a 3-run home run from Boston provided the margin of victory for us. A couple hits from Coma Duran, 3 hits from Ferguson, and of course the big blow from Boston. Barbarito with another nice outing, 3 hits, 1 walk, and 6 strikeouts over 5 1/3. And then Ruckel with his 3rd hold of the playoffs, Auclair with his 2nd hold of the playoffs, and Scott with his 4th save of the playoffs, combine for 3 2/3 innings of scoreless relief. So we are kind of back on track now. Certainly would like to win at least one more game here in Washington. If we can head back to Buffalo with a 3-2 lead, feel pretty good about where we are. Another one of our old pitchers, Isidro Ochoa, on the mound for Washington. The 35-year-old, 9-12 this year with a 4.32 ERA. Been a while since Ochoa was on our team. 2038 was when we moved on from him. I believe we traded him away. I think he was... he was in the big Juan Romero trade, who we moved on from after this past season. And you can see Romero here hit .254 with 28 homers and 79 ribbies for the Cubs. Romero was a big part of our offense for the 5 years he was with us. But Ochoa was one of the cornerstones to get that trade done. Had a respectable but not great season for the Nationals this year. Ochoa, similar to Juan Estrada, was also a member of the Buffalo Wings for each of our first two World Series champions. A youngster who's never been on a World Series championship team, Chris Lott, will be on the mound for us today. 10-11 with a 4.09 ERA for our number one starter. We didn't do well against Estrada. Let's see if we can do a little better against another former pitcher in Isidro Ochoa. And we do get a win today, 12-6. Ochoa took the loss. Roberts with the win in relief and Hale with the save. So I'm guessing it was either a extra inning game where we finally exploded on them, or a very weird game in terms of the pattern, because those are two names that you're not necessarily going to expect to see in the summary of the box score all that often for us. Got another home run from Tim Boston. Taking a look at that box score, and was kind of a crazy game. They went up 1-0 in the first. We came back and took a 3-1 lead in the second, which we extended to 4-1 in the third. They came back with 4 runs in the bottom of the inning to close, to take the lead back from us. We bounced right back in the top of the fourth to take the lead for good with 3 runs, bases clearing double by Rojas. And then we added a couple in the 6th, 1 in the 8th, and 2 in the 9th. So basically just probably a bit of an ugly game for the bullpen. Nice to see everyone on our team getting at least 1 hit. 3 hits for Velasco, Boston, and Medina. And the pitching was pretty wild when you look at it. 6 hits and a walk, 5 runs all earned over 2 1/3. Roberts came on and gave up 5 hits in 2 innings, but he did earn the W. Manelli was good. And then Hale with a 3-inning save with the pretty big lead, allowed 3 hits, struck out 4, and 1 earned run. So actually looking at this, the Game 5 is setting up for us pretty well. I don't know what we'll ultimately need from our bullpen, but we haven't used the likes of... Actually, we did use them yesterday, so we have used some of our big relievers, but they all got the day off today. So a 3-1 lead now, and as much as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to go back to Buffalo with a 3-2 lead. Now that we're in a position where we don't necessarily need to play another game in the NLCS in Buffalo if we win today. The goal is just to get the W today and not even take the risk of a total collapse in Buffalo. Our ace is back on the mound in Jim Lance going up against Brad White. That was a good matchup for us in Game 1, which we won 9-1. And another pretty easy win today, 8-2. Lance with his second win of the series, White with his second loss. Daniel Rojas, a couple of home runs, and Rojas, the veteran, ended up being named the NLCS MVP. So for the 4th time in Buffalo Wings history, we're headed to a World Series. We'll be facing against the Guardians or the Royals, and we'll see if, despite the struggles we've had in the NLCS, where our record is now 4-6, we'll see if we can remain undefeated in the World Series in the coming days. Take a look at the box score here today. Scored a run in the first, a run in the third, and then kind of broke things open a bit with 3 in the fifth. Porter with a double and Rojas with a 2-run homer in that inning, and then a 2-run double from Reichert in the 7th. So a nice performance. Seifu back on the mound, or back in the lineup against the lefty. 0 for 4 today. He's hitting just a $167 in the playoffs. But Porter and Medina, as well as Velasco, all hitting over 300 in the playoffs this year. And Rojas, who at times, despite the fact we paid him a lot of money to be a big-time power hitter, hasn't necessarily come through with a lot of home runs in the playoffs, does have a tied for team best 7 ribbies in the playoffs now, and he did just hit the first 2 home runs of his playoff season in this past game. So hopefully that'll carry over to the World Series, and we will get some more home runs from him. Lance with the W, 4 hits and a walk, 2 earned runs over 5 2/3, and then Ruckel and Manelli combine over the last 3 1/3 innings to allow just a single walk between the two of them. And our Buffalo Wings are off to the 2044 World Series. And some of you probably noticed this in the Boston score, or in the box score. I glossed right over it, but Rojas, 5-hit day in addition to the 2 home runs in that 8-2 victory to clinch the National League pennant. And it was looking like we might have a decision to make with Mr. Fuchs, who was set to be healthy just about the first game of the World Series, which is tomorrow, but we just heard that he's hit a setback. Going to be at least 4 days till he's ready to play again, which means that he'll certainly miss the first 2 games at home against Cleveland. And then if he didn't have another setback, he might be ready for Game 3. But given that his availability appears to be somewhat uncertain at this point, we are going to just run things back with the exact same lineup and roster that we used in the NLCS. And as you can see, we're going to be facing off tomorrow, beginning tomorrow, against the Cleveland Indians. So a perfect matchup for baseball here today. The Indians were the team that was closest to us in the race for the best record in baseball. I believe we're the only 200-win team. The Royals actually also did get to 100, but the 2 winningest teams in baseball, the 102-win AL East champion Cleveland Guardians against the 104-win NL East winning Buffalo Wings. You can see Cleveland actually took the season series against us. Again, a small series, 2 out of 3. And both teams are excellent offensively and excellent defensively. Cleveland 3rd in the AL in runs scored, 2nd in runs allowed, while we were 3rd in the NL in runs scored and 1st in runs allowed. So should be a very good matchup here in the World Series. Hopefully, the fact that we have home field advantage will make a difference. And something's going to have to give in this series. As I mentioned, the 2 best teams in baseball in the regular season facing off, and they've both been pretty dominant in the playoffs. We have won 7 out of 8 games against the Padres and the Nationals. The Guardians have won 7 out of 9 games against the Twins and the Royals. So a really even matchup here for the 2044 World Series. The dream, of course, would be to send Dashawn Seifu out the way that very few potential Hall of Famers get to go out, winning a championship in their final season. But we're 4 games away from that being a potential possibility. given that we did have to use Jim Lance in the clinching Game 5. Our longtime ace, who's now our number 2 starter, Alexis Barajas, will be on the mound, but anytime you can put an 18-game winner, former Cy Young Award winner who just led the National League in wins on the mound in a big game, you feel pretty good about your chances. He'll be going up against Dan Rodriguez Murillo, 26-year-old who was 12-11 with a 3.38 ERA for Cleveland this year. Hopefully, we can get things off to a good start here in Game 1. Not to be the case, though. A 4-2 loss, and our bullpen, Joe Scott, takes the loss, so that's disappointing. We did get a home run from the youngster Reichert. We took a 1-0 lead in the third. We had a 2-1 lead after the sixth. They came back and tied it in the top of the seventh. And then 2 runs for the Guardians in the top of the 10th off of our closer, Joe Scott, to get the win. Not a lot of offense, just 7 hits for the Wings, 2 hits by Velasco, and 2 hits by Reichert, including the homer. Barajas was good, 3 hits, 1 walk, 3 strikeouts over 6 innings. Auclair gave up a run over the 2 innings that he pitched. And then Scott with 2 hits, 2 walks, 3 strikeouts, and 2 earned runs over the 2 innings that he pitched. So a lot going on with the bullpen for us today. There are not normally a lot of games where our bullpen gets out-pitched, but this was one of them. 3 earned runs over 4 innings from our bullpen, while the Cleveland bullpen gave them 5 innings of scoreless 2-hit baseball. Rojas and their pitcher Rodriguez Murillo ejected in the 6th for igniting a bench-clearing brawl. Their reliever Bobby DiMatteo was also hurt. We'll have to see if there's any suspensions. Hopefully not. Moving on to game number 2, and looks like we're coming back with Lance in game 2. I think he is. Yep, he's on full rest now, or more than full rest, so that's good. Going up against Billy Payne, good right-hander, 27 years old, 10-6 with a 3.64 ERA. So another good pitching matchup here today, and you can see both of these guys have been good in the playoffs with ERAs under 3 this season. It's not technically a must-win, but with our ace on the mound and down 1-0 at home, certainly would like to get this series back to even before we head out to Cleveland. And we do get a 3-1 win. Manelli with the win in relief. Scott bounces back to pick up the save. Homer from Velasco. Taking a look at the box score, we scored a run in the first and 2 in the 7th to take a 3-0 lead. They did get another run in the 9th. I'm wondering if that came off of Scott. It probably did. So he does not seem to be as sharp as he has been. Velasco with the solo homer in the first, and then Rojas trying to make a case to maybe win a NL to tack a World Series MVP onto his NLCS MVP with a 2-run single in the 7th off of our former lefty, Matthew Wenzel. Still not a lot of offense for us today, just 6 hits, 2 of which came from the shortstop, Mike Whitehead. But we got enough pitching, although Scott, kind of rocky for a second straight outing, 3 hits and 1 earned run over an inning. But he does ultimately get the save, and we'll have a day off for travel tomorrow. Lance, only 3 2/3 innings. Walked 3, struck out 7, only allowed 1 hit. But the pitch count was up to 76, and I guess our manager decided to go to the bullpen early, and it all kind of worked out with 5 1/3 innings of relief, only 1 run allowed by the Buffalo Wings. So we've evened things up. So we're feeling a little better about where we stand as we begin the short trip from Buffalo to Cleveland. Fuchs is now healthy, but without an injury, can't get him onto the roster for us. So we'll continue to run with the players that we've been running with since the NLCS. The goal is to win 2 out of 3 in Cleveland and come back to Buffalo with a lead. Clearly, they've got home field advantage, and they're an excellent team, so that's not going to be easy for us to do. Our odds of doing that certainly higher if we get a W today. Eric Barbarito on the mound for us. He just turned 30 since his last outing. Going up against Nate Ebanks, 25-year-old lefty, 13-7 with a 3.09 ERA, 3.5 WAR, strong 1.33 ERA plus, and 83 FIP minus for the Guardians this year. Lefty on the mound does mean that we will be seeing Mr. Seifu in the lineup. Would love to see some vintage Dashawn Seifu get on base 2 or 3 times today and steal a couple of bases for us. Well, we got the win 3-2. Barbarito with the W, Scott with the save, so that's the most positive thing. We know that 1 run at least came off of a homer from the third baseman, Ramiro Medina. We'll see if Seifu did anything to contribute to the win as well. And he was 1 for 3 with a run scored, so nice to see the veteran performing well. Big day from Medina, 3 for 4 with 2 runs scored and 2 ribbies. Not much offense otherwise. Porter and Velasco were the only other guys who had hits for us. Excellent outing from Barbarito, who has been probably our best starter throughout the playoffs. 2 hits, no walks, and 8 strikeouts over 7 innings. Claire with kind of a sloppy relief outing, allowed 2 earned runs over an inning, turned it over to Scott, who picked up his 6th save of the playoffs. Ebanks was not great, 4 hits, 3 earned runs over 4 1/3, and we did enough, just enough, to get the 3-2 victory. So now, if we can win one of the next 2 games, we can go back to Buffalo with a 3-2 lead, which was certainly our goal as we came here for Game 3 in Cleveland. Okay, I guess I got to take Fuchs off of the IL, even though I can't put him onto our roster. So Chris Lott, brutal outing in his 1 game for us that he has pitched in these playoffs, although, as we talked about, was solid this year with a 10-11 record, 4.09 ERA. Certainly hope to get more out of the 26-year-old from Elizabeth, New Jersey in this outing. Going up against Luis Aranda, 14-8 with a 3.94 ERA for the 30-year-old left-handed pitcher for the Guardians. Does not have the most impressive profile in the world. This certainly seems to be the least pitching dominant game potentially in this series. Could be a lot of runs scored today, and our hope is that we score at least 1 more of them than the Guardians do. Not to be the case, though. Ended up, they got a good pitching outing. 5-1 victory for them as Aranda outpitches Lott. We got a homer from Reichert. They got a homer from Pablo Luis Pfeiffer. Looks like a pretty impressive young 26-year-old. 51 homers and 138 ribbies for him this year. Hadn't heard his name much till now. Hopefully he's not waking up from a slumber as we head into the final 3 games of this series. This is one that we might regret, losing to Aranda. They jumped on us with 3 runs in the first and really never looked back after that 3-run homer from Pfeiffer. Seifu was 1 for 4. Reichert with a couple of hits, including the homer. Ferguson, Velasco, and Ramirez also got hits, but only 6 hits on the game for Buffalo. Lott, 4 hits, 2 walks, 3 earned runs over 4 innings. Warner and Hale both gave up runs in relief. So it was just kind of a sloppy outing overall from the Buffalo pitchers, and not a particularly good offensive performance for us either. So a critical Game 5 now, knotted up 2 games apiece here in the 2044 World Series. Rematch of game number 1, which the Guardians won in Buffalo, with Barajas on the mound against Rodriguez Murillo. We'd like to return the favor to them and win on the road like they did in game 1 with this pitching matchup. Barajas 0-1 with a 3.52 ERA in the playoffs this year. He's been such a good pitcher for us and such a good player for us all these years. Would certainly love, even if he does end up leaving after this season, to see him get one more win in the playoffs in a Buffalo uniform here today in this critical Game 5. And we do get the W, and Barajas gets the W too. So we ended up taking 2 out of 3 in Cleveland, which was our goal. So we're heading up in the series 3-2 as we go back to Buffalo for the final 2 games. Hopefully only 1 game left in the series. Eau Claire with the save. Got a home run from Tim Boston, his first of the World Series. We scored early, 3 runs in the second and 2 in the third. Run scoring single by Ramirez, run scoring double by Whitehead, and a run scoring double by Velasco in the second accounted for the 3 runs. And then Boston with the 2-run homer in the third staked us to that 5-0 lead. Hung on to win 7-3. Barajas does get what could be his final postseason win in a Buffalo uniform. Struck out 12 over 5 innings. Manelli, Hale, Palencia, and Eau Claire combined in relief. Everyone's going to get a day off now before we go back. Barajas set a Buffalo Wings playoff game record for strikeouts with 12. So if this does end up being Alexis Barajas' final game in a Buffalo Wings uniform, he went out the way he often did, with a excellent outing in a clutch spot, and he has our Buffalo Wings 1 win away from a World Series title. And as we get ready for game number 6 with a 3-2 lead in the 2044 World Series, we can see that if we go to a game 7, it will be at home against a left-handed pitcher, which could mean that Dashawn Seifu could have an opportunity to maybe do something incredible in what could be the final game of his major league career. As much as I love a wonderful storyline, and as much as I love dramatics, I'd prefer to just get the win today, even if it doesn't mean that, even if it does mean that we won't get to see Seifu one final time in a Buffalo uniform. Because although Barbarito's been very good throughout these playoffs, as we've talked about, this is the game when we've got our number 1 starter on the mound, Jim Lance, going up against Billy Payne from Cleveland, also a very good pitcher, 10-6 with a 3.64 ERA this year. This is a rematch of Game 2, which we won at home 3-1. As I said, as much as I'd love to see Dashawn Seifu on the field for one more game in the starting lineup, I'd still much rather just get the win today and clinch the World Series title against Cleveland. And we are the champions. We've unlocked the Moneyball achievement. But the Wings winning the 2044 World Series, so kind of interesting. Ishmael Velasco, who in 2041 was the Rookie of the Year and the World Series MVP when we won our last World Series championship, is the World Series MVP again this year. Eau Claire with the win in relief. Joe Scott with his 3rd save of the World Series. I can't imagine Seifu even got into the game. Taking a look at the box score, Cleveland jumped out to a 1-0 lead in the second. We tied it up in the fourth. They scored runs in the fifth and the sixth to take a 3-1 lead to the bottom of the sixth. But then in the bottom of the sixth, the young second baseman with a 2-run triple to tie it up, Danny Ferguson, and then the young outfielder Jim Reichert with a run-scoring double in the bottom of the seventh. 5-3 win, and the Buffalo Wings with our 4th World Championship in our history, in our 17th consecutive playoff year. Neymar Rengifo, pleased with what the team accomplished. Taking a look at the box score, Reichert, we talked about, had the ribby. Also got 2 hits and a ribby from Boston. As we've talked about, could end up being the last go-round for Rojas. This could certainly be the last go-round for Seifu. This could certainly be the last go-round with us for Barajas. And Barbarito could be gone too, among others. But if it is the final action for all of these players in a Buffalo Wings uniform, they're going out on top as we've captured the 2044 World Series. 4-2 over the Guardians. Lance just 4 innings pitched, 4 hits, 1 earned run, 4 strikeouts. The lefty Warner was not good in relief. 4 hits and 2 earned runs over an inning and 2/3. But after that, things got better. Hale, Auclair, and Scott combined to allow just 2 hits, 1 walk, and no run over the final 3 1/3 innings. Everything that was allowed by Scott. So he was certainly a bit sloppy in these playoffs. But when all was said and done, he still compiled 7 saves for us. Reichert, the player of the game. And as we talked about, Ishmael Velasco is Mr. Clutch. World Series MVP in 2041 as a rookie. And now the World Series MVP again here in 2044. Didn't get to see Seifu in what may have been his final game as a major league player, what may have been his final game in a Buffalo Wings uniform if we can't figure out an agreement to bring him back next year if he doesn't retire. But he still will be going out with the 4th World Championship of his career. Both him and Barajas, if this is the final go-round they had with us, were members and have been members of all 4 of our World Championship teams. So at this point, glad to have another win in the books for the Buffalo Wings. It's time to kind of sim ahead to the off-season and find out if Mr. Seifu's career is complete or if we have some interesting decisions to make. I hope he retires, not because, or not only because, and not primarily because it makes things easier for me without having to make a decision, but he's a 40-year-old future Hall of Famer who's become a platoon player this year, who is inept defensively after winning Gold Gloves early in his career. He's about to get that 4th MLB championship icon. One of the rare guys who could go out on top as a world champion. It just makes too much sense for him to retire, but who knows? He's still healthy. He's still got some speed. And as we talked about, he still hit 300 against left-handed pitching. It's going to be interesting. And we've made it to the beginning of the off season, and we've collected our World Series trophy. You can see we've got 14 messages here waiting for us in our inbox. One of them is certainly about Dashawn Seifu, who in that 1256 score this season is a pretty high one. That might be the highest one we've achieved so far. I'll have to check on that. But We're certainly going to have an email from Dashawn Seifu. It's either, or an email about Dashawn Seifu. It's either going to say Dashawn Seifu has decided to retire, or it's going to say you have a team option on Dashawn Seifu that you need to decide on. I hope it says he retired. He's got to go out as a World Series champion. There's just nothing better than a guy who was the number one overall pick of a team, spent 19 years with that team in the majors, 3,000 hits, 4 World Series championships, and go out after winning one at the age of 40. You couldn't make this stuff up. He's got to retire. OOTP AI, don't fail me now. And before we look at that, though, and find out what's going on, yeah, that 1256 score was by far the best we've ever had. I don't really even understand why it's so wackily high, but we will take it. And now, let's see. Option year decision needed on Dashawn Seifu, so he is not going to voluntarily retire. So that puts me, and we've got a new owner for the Buffalo Wings. A lot going on here. Option year decision on Nate Ruckel. Option year decision on Dashawn Seifu. As we kind of anticipated, Alexis Barajas voided his last option year. Our market size has increased to above average. New budget from Joe Farmer, $256 million. So that's a lot more. I think that's $12 million more than we've ever had before. So that bump up in market size certainly helped. New team owner, Chris Ames. He's extended our contract. Let's see what Ames is like. He's not going to be as nice to deal with as Joe Farmer was with his economizer fiscal personality, his focus more on profit than winning, tolerant as far as his patience, normal involvement. So that'll be a new challenge for us to have a new owner going forward. Got a trade proposal here. Phew. Interesting closer, but Danny Black is one of the top starting prospects in our organization. So Toscano is a guy who could technically be a starter with that decent sinker as his third pitch. Did start 15 games for Nashville this year. Certainly something for me to think about. Danny Black is the number 32 prospect in baseball, but was 10-14 with a 5.12 ERA this past year in Jamestown. So I'll have to spend a little time thinking about that. Off season begins. So Ames taking over. Joel Farmer goes out after a 4th World Series championship. Kind of wish Dashawn Seifu had done the same thing. As I mentioned, there was a suggestion in the comments to maybe just retire Seifu using the commissioner powers and make him a coach within our organization to kind of keep him connected. I don't want him to become one of these OOTP nomads who goes and plays in the independent leagues or AA and AAA in his 40s after a Hall of Fame career rather than just retiring. So I'm going to have to make some decisions. The first decision, though, is going to be to decline the $6 million option. So we are going to void that last contract year and give Seifu a payout. Nate Ruckel, 36-year-old lefty, former stopper, 8-3 for us this year with a 3.11 ERA. Still a pretty good left-handed pitcher. The $2 million number on him is not bad, so we're going to go ahead and execute that option. Let's talk to Mr. Seifu now and see how he is feeling and what he is thinking. He wants a 3-year contract at $2.3 million a year. I don't care about the money. I didn't want to pay him $6 million to be a bench guy for us. 2.3 is a little ridiculous for what he is, but it's not enough money to not be willing to pay him it, especially with the fact that we just got that big bump that I talked about. We were at 244 a couple years ago, and now we're up to 256 with this market size change in Buffalo. And with Rojas' contract coming off the books, Barbarito coming off potentially after his final arbitration year, and Barajas opting out of that contract, we've got a ton of money to potentially spend. So there is an opportunity to bring, or at least attempt to bring, some of those other players that I've been talking about that were potentially at the end of their run with us back. But the first thing that we're going to need to think about is, how do you solve a problem like Dashawn Seifu? If you've got thoughts on what we should do with him, would love to hear them in the comments. I'm not going to let him go play for another team, or as I said, more likely, given his lack of defensive ability at this point, I'm not going to let him go become an OOTP nomad who, goes and plays in the Frontier League for 2 years in his 40s rather than retiring. So the options that I can think of would be to manually retire him using my commissioner powers, or sign him to the deal that he's looking for. Or let's be honest, if you've watched me before, we're going to try to sign him to a bit less than he's looking for if we sign him. But sign him and bring him back and use the 26th spot on our roster for a soon-to-be 41-year-old part-time DH against left-handed pitchers who can't play anywhere in the field anymore. Is he one of the 26 best players in our organization at this point? No. Am I going to let Dashawn Seifu play in another uniform? No. So if you've got thoughts on the decision, should we sign him and bring him back and just let him play out another year or two on our bench? Or should we just retire Dashawn Seifu and let him head into retirement and begin having the 5-year clock on his potential Hall of Fame eligibility start ticking by forcibly retiring him? If you've got thoughts on what we should do, would love to hear them in the comments. Just as a programming note for those of you who have been loyal enough to stick with me to the end of this episode, probably going to be a little bit of time before we ultimately decide what to do with Seifu, so you should have plenty of time to opine. I will be putting out the annual roster review and minor league system prospect former player review episodes over the next couple of days on Saturday and Sunday. But then after that, I'm going to be traveling for work, for business next week, and will not be putting out any episodes for several days, possibly close to a week. So a warning, those of you who enjoy this, you're probably only getting 2 more episodes on Saturday and Sunday, February 3rd and 4th, before there's going to be a bit of a lull. So if you want to take your time consuming those, we will see you on the other side when we resume some episodes towards the end of next week. So that will give me time to consider what to do with Seifu, and it will give me plenty of time to read the comments of anyone who has an opinion on it, because as I mentioned, we've got 2 episodes coming up the next couple of days, but those episodes are typically done without moving the off-season forward one single bit. So we won't have to offer a contract to Seifu anytime soon if we decide that's the case. Or if we decide we're going to retire him, we'll get that Hall of Fame clock ticking. But I'm happy that we've kept this team together, haven't decided to tear things down. As I mentioned, it's going to be another big off-season of transition for us with the quality of the players that we could be losing. But with the fact that we've reloaded our farm system before this season started with the likes of Fuchs and Reichert, and Reichert was just certainly a good contributor through the playoffs, feeling like we can keep this team competitive under our new ownership, which is probably going to be a little more challenging than the old ownership, particularly with that economizer personality that our new owner has, and the fact that he's more interested in profitability than winning. It'll give us some interesting challenges here in 2044 as we head into what are likely some of the final seasons of this playthrough before we turn our attention to OOTP 25. So happy about a 4th World Series title for the Buffalo Wings. Gonna go pop a cold one in celebration. And until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.